and just pretend it never happened, and I did, and of course I used that on one of our episodes.
Larry David was the ultimate comics comic. You know, the guy who went on stage, and all the comics would come in the room and watch him because he was a great stand-up, but he was not the type of stand-up who embraced the audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, comedy stylings of Larry David.
He was about 3 minutes up there. He wasn't really getting too many laughs, and he goes, "I don't need this. Forget it."
He threw the microphone down, called the audience a bunch of ignorant and walked off the stage.
He said, "F you." He said, "F you people." And he left the stage. I went, wow, what an act.
Well, but it was mostly on stage that I had seen him kind of, lose his temper a little bit. But I figured since we're not going to be on stage, we're just going to be in a room, maybe it wouldn't be so bad.
We pitched the show in much the same way that Jerry and George pitched the show to the NBC executives on the series. Jerry and I came in, and I had no experience at all.
So what have you two come up with?
Well, we thought about this in a variety of ways, but the basic idea is I would play myself. Oh, go ahead.
I think I can sum up the show for you with one word. Nothing. Nothing? Nothing. What does that mean? The show is about nothing.
Well, it's not about nothing.
No, it's about nothing.
Well, maybe in philosophy, but even nothing is something.
What's the premise?
Well, as I was saying, I would play myself, and as a comedian living in New York, and I have a friend and a neighbor and an ex-girlfriend, which is all true.
Yeah, but nothing happens on the show. See, it's just like life. Well, why am I watching it? Because it's on TV. Not yet.
We pitched it as the one-camera show. And then I remember that they said, oh, no. This is not one camera. This is 3 cameras. This is a 3-camera show. And I recoiled at the notion of a 3-camera show.
I, for one, am not going to compromise my artistic integrity. And I'll tell you something else. This is the show, and we're not going to change it. Right?
No. This is not the show. And the room kind of went quiet, and I looked over at one of the Castle Rock executives, Glenn Padnick, and his eyes were popping out of his head. I think he thought that the whole thing was going to go up in smoke right there.
That was the famous meeting. If you think we're going to, if this is the idea, and if you think we're going to change it, we're not. Which nobody had even suggested changing it. But he was throwing down the meaningless gauntlet.
Jerry had a way of kind of convincing me to do things, and he said, well, we'll talk about it. It'll be fine. We can. And then eventually I'm thinking now about the $25,000 that I'm going to get for the pilot, and I said, oh, well, yeah, maybe we could do a 3-camera show.
And I remember ending the meeting, and I looked at Rick, and I said, I don't know. You know, look, it's a script commitment. You know, we haven't spent that much money on this guy, and who the hell knows? I guess.
We wrote the pilot, and it really didn't take us all that long. to quote George from one of the episodes when he was lying about being an architect, about the new wing on the Guggenheim. Really didn't take me that long.
We had a lot of fun writing that. We always had fun writing. It was never a struggle. I don't remember us ever really racking our brains too much in writing. We had a great chemistry.
The story of the pilot, where a woman who Jerry had met out of town asked if she could stay with him. She was going to be in New York for a couple of days and wondered if she could stay with him, and what all that meant.
It was the thing that we always were drawn to, were these gaps in society where there was no rules. You know, how do you find this out? How do you ask this? What does this mean? There's no indication.
I have here, I've saved all these years, the very first draft that the network received. Castle Rock Entertainment says right there. And the interesting part of it is that the title is not The Seinfeld Chronicles. It's not Seinfeld. It's stand-up.
It certainly wasn't a strong story drive, and it was kind of all over the place, but it was funny. So we all said, oh, what the hell? Let's try a pilot on this thing and let's see what happens. You know what? Jerry's a funny guy. They seem to have a pretty good thing going on here with Larry. God, we still need to get a good showrunner on this show. And we just said, go make it.
A week later, I had discovered a script that had been, half of it had been rewritten, or maybe a third of it. I'd say a third. It didn't really make a difference who rewrote it. Once Woody Allen could have rewritten it, I would have hated it. It doesn't matter. It wasn't theirs, it was ours. And once I saw it had been rewritten, I was livid.
I remember a lot of very, there was a lot of conversation, very animated conversation. And I do remember a point, and I bet you remember this too. It was at Castle Rock, and it was a big fight. I think it was you and Andy, as it usually was, and Gilbert was there. And I could never figure out exactly what these guys were fighting about, or which side. And I remember you turning to me one time and going, so what do you think about this? Do you remember that?
Yeah, and you go, ah.
I was just determined to try and get as much of their stuff out that I could, and as much of our stuff back in. And to that degree, I succeeded somewhat, not all the way. And to this day, I have to say, I have a lot of difficulty watching that pilot.
The role of George Costanza was just leapt off the page.
People have often asked me, how come you didn't play George? Didn't you want to play George? And the answer to that is no. There was never a notion that I wanted to do this. All I wanted to do here was write this thing, get my money, and go back to New York. That was my only plan. There was no plan of acting or anything like that. And plus, they never would have approved of me as an actor anyway. And how could I write it and act at the same time? And I really had no interest in it at all.
We never thought it should be like Larry. I mean, obviously, we wanted someone that could do the conversations the way Larry and I would do them. But we really were just looking for someone who would be a counterpoint to the type of person that I was. Someone who would just be kind of different from what I was.
We started the process and saw every actor we could possibly see in Los Angeles.
Nobody ever really hit it the way we thought that it needed.
I had worked with Jason Alexander when I was working on the casting of the original ER.
I'd gotten my hands on him, I'd have torn him to pieces. I fenced in college. Carry on.
Yeah. I never met Jason Alexander. I'd seen him in a Neil Simon play, Broadway Bound. But that was a different kind of character in that play, and it was fairly dramatic, that role.
I had no idea who Jason Alexander was. I don't even think I had heard of him.
I didn't get a script for the Seinfeld Chronicles. They don't do that in New York. They send you sides. They send you, a 3 or 4 page snippet.
But Larry and I saw him on a tape, which is the worst way to ever see anyone audition. No one ever comes off well.
And I read this thing, and it had no context. It was like no other pilot script I ever read. It had something to do with trying to tell Jerry that he was misreading signals that this girl was giving him. And it read very much like a Woody Allen film to me. So using that as a model, I went out and got a pair of glasses. I didn't actually wear glasses at the time.
He was balding, and he was a little overweight, and he had on a pair of glasses, and he was sitting on a stool, and he had the script, and he was just reading along with the casting director, who wasn't on camera.
And I did on the audition tape, a blatant Woody Allen impression. I'm going, "It's signals, Jerry, it's signals." And I said, well, that was a complete waste of time.
But the second we saw him, like 2 lines out of his mouth, he went, "That's the guy."
That's it. Turn it off. That's the guy.
Apparently, my imitation isn't as good as I think it is, so that it wasn't quite reading to them as Woody Allen.
I mean, it was just so completely obvious that he was so talented and so funny, and perfect, just perfect.
I flew out. I think I came to the Castle Rock offices. Met Jerry, met Larry. God knows who else was in the room. We talked for a while, and I read a bit more of the stuff for them.
The two of them had a great chemistry right from the beginning. They were right on the same wavelength. And you could see that this relationship was going to work.
Traditionally, during the casting process, we bring 1, 2, or 3 choices of our frontrunners for each role into the network executive suite at NBC.
And the only other guy that I remember seeing, and there may have been more, but I don't think so, the only other guy that was auditioning that day was Larry Miller. And I don't know why I knew this, but I knew that Larry and Jerry were very good friends.
That's right. Larry Miller read for the George part. He was my best friend, still is.
So I had nothing on it when I went into the room. I was very relaxed because I knew I'm not getting this.